put my name on this. I'm not going to stay with it. And so none of those series ever got on the air.
Interesting, too, because he could imagine so far in the future. I mean, just think about it. If he never got involved, if there was never no Star Trek, look at all the TV series it came after. It would never happened.
It's not only that, Gary, but Star Trek was very big with NASA. I've got a picture in one of these books of everybody at NASA, like in '68. All those guys in the control room who are interacting with one of the Apollo missions, and every one of them is wearing Spock ears. Every one of them. NASA loved it. Gene ran all those scripts by scientists, the RAND Corporation, DeForest Research, NASA, and he always said, look, I'm not asking that everything in this show be plausible, but everything needs to be possible. And he wouldn't put anything in those shows if the scientists came back and said that's not possible. They may come back and say, well, you're kind of pushing it a bit, but hey, 200, 300 years from now, it is possible this could happen. And so he did that. Irwin Allen wasn't doing that, and no slight to Irwin, because Irwin was being forced to change his shows to the network's liking. They said, let's make Lost in Space sillier and funnier. He didn't want to do that, but he went along with what they asked him to do. Let's make Voice of OMC Monster of the Week, because every time we have a monster on, the ratings jump up even more. So he said, you're the network, I'll do it for you. And I've written a couple books on Irwin Allen shows as well. And I got access to his private papers. And so I have a book out on Voice of OMC and one out on Lost in Space. And so you get to see what's going on there. The reason I wrote those, by the way, is because those shows made it possible for Star Trek. Irwin Allen proved to the networks that you could do an hour-long science fiction show in the future with continuing characters, on budget, on schedule, and get a mass audience. Voice of OMC in fall of '64, Lost in Space in fall of '65, and that's what finally got NBC to put Star Trek on in the fall of '66, after playing around with 2 pilot films for 2 years. That finally says, okay, those shows are doing great for the other networks, we need it. So Irwin was kind of a pioneer in his own way, and he helped open the door. But then Star Trek had a later time slot, so Roddenberry said, I'm going to come in and tell morality plays. I'm going to tackle hot topics. I'm going to make the show educational. And but the astronauts loved it. NASA loved it. And it helped raise funding for space missions. So Star Trek not only influenced television, but that. And would we have the cell phone now if it wasn't Star Trek? That was modeled after Kirk's flip-open communicator. Our internet and computers were modeled after Spock's internet system, his computer system on the Enterprise. McCoy's scanner was the first MRI. It's just all these things. The first time we saw a DVD was on Star Trek. It's just the Bluetooth in Uhura's ear and Spock's ears was on Star Trek. So much stuff has gotten into our culture and into our science because of a TV show.
Oh, yeah. Now, I know we were only going to go to 8:30. Can you go to the end of the show at 9?
Sure.
Now, the Star Trek Next Generation, how did that come about?
That's an interesting story, and nobody knows it. Well, there's people who know it because they've told me. I've interviewed people and so forth, but it hasn't come out yet. That's going to be a book coming up because I've been asked to do a book series on Next Generation as well, and I've already done the research, and I've collected thousands of memos and all these type of things. So I'll tell you this part. And I've never told this to anybody else, I don't think, so you're getting an exclusive here because you were smart enough to ask the question. Gene Roddenberry owned 25% of Star Trek. Bill Shatner owned 5%. It's the end of the 70s. It's been the top show in syndication for 10 years now, and neither of them have seen a dime. Paramount keeps saying it's still in the red, and yet it's on 200 stations across the United States, 5 nights a week, which is more stations, by the way, than any of the networks had. It's in 70 foreign countries, and after 10 years, beating the competition everywhere, Paramount's saying it's still in the red. That's not possible. It was out of the red the first year it was in syndication. And so Roddenberry's not getting any money from this show. He made the first movie. It went over budget, not to his fault. Paramount hired a special effects company. They blew a lot of money, like $4 million, and didn't deliver anything that was usable. So they had to hire another special effects company to do all the opticals. They hired Robert Weiss. He tore down all the sets, changed the costumes, redid it all to look different than the TV show because it was going to look like the TV show. And it was going to be a TV show. It was going to be phase 2, and at the last minute they decided to do a movie. Anyway, so it went over budget. It got mixed reviews. So Paramount took it away from Gene. And for all the other movies, he was only a consultant. Harv Bennett was the producer. So Gene has his child ripped from his arms. And we get it to the mid-'80s now. I think they were doing the 4th movie, Voyage Home. And Paramount came to him and said, we've decided to do another series. Finally, we're going to do another series. But we can't do it with the original cast because they're doing the movies. So we've come up with the title, Star Trek Next Generation. It's going to be about space cadets. And Gene just retched. Like, you're not going to do a show about space cadets. And so the only 2 things that survived that concept was the title and the character of Wesley Crusher. Gene said, I will come back in, I will create a new show, and all that kind of stuff. Well, the thing that nudged him to do this, besides the fact that he just couldn't stand the thought that it was going to be space cadets, is he was out playing golf with the top lawyer of Paramount Pictures. And they got to the 9th hole, and the lawyer says, let's make it interesting. Let's do $100. And Gene says, well, that's a little rich for my blood. Why don't we just do it for whatever Paramount owes me on Star Trek reruns? And he said, by the way, how much is that? And now I've gotten this from 2 different sources. The guy kind of leaned in, nobody's around, and he says, we figure it's about $40 million. Gene went home, and I was told this by a witness, went home and took the golf club to his walls. He was just enraged. And he called his lawyer, and he said, we got to do something about this. And the lawyer said, well, they want you to do that series. Let me work something out in the contracts. So I'm coming up on the punchline here. You got 1 more minute on this?
Oh, we got plenty of time.
Here's the big ending of this. So they go over and they have a press party. Everyone in the press is there. They announce the fact that they're going to do Star Trek The Next Generation. Roddenberry's there, and the head of Paramount's there, and the whole bit. And they sign the contracts in front of the press and do a whole meeting. And then afterwards, Gene goes over to the president's table, and he says, the guy says, congratulations, we're in business again, and all this type of stuff. And he says, yeah. Oh, by the way, my accountant's going to be calling tomorrow, and we'd like to take a look at the books. And he says, the books for what? He says, for Star Trek. He says, well, Gene, we haven't made the show yet. We just signed the contracts. I know you have a clause in there that says you can inspect the books, but we haven't even made the show yet. And he says, no, I'm talking about the first show. He says, well, you don't have the right to inspect the books for the first show. He says, you should look at the contract again. The contract for Next Generation didn't say Star Trek Next Generation. It just said Star Trek, the series. So that gave him rights to go look at the bookkeeping for the first series. The next day, somebody shows up at his bungalow on the lot, and he had been shopping for a new car, and I was told he wanted to get a Rolls Royce. And somebody knocks on the door, and it's somebody from Paramount, and they hand him keys, and there's a brand new Rolls sitting out there in front of his bungalow, and they hand him a check, not for $40 million, but they hand him a sizable check, and they say, you're going to get one of these every month and until we've paid off the balance. So Star Trek The Next Generation, according to the people that I've interviewed, and I'm still looking to see some of these documents. I've got a lot of documents, but I'm still trying to see some of these vital documents to confirm this, because I always like to do that. According to these people, the 2 main reasons, I know about the Space Cadets, because Gene told me that himself, and I found the proposal for the Space Cadets, and I found his letters saying no, and everything else. But according to the other people that I talked to, the other motivation was the fact that this was the tool to finally get the money released to him and Bill Shatner for what they were owed on the original series.
That was a smart move.
So that's how it came about. That may not be as romantic as you want to hear.
Well, you know,
it wasn't that he was saying, I am destined to make this show, but the reason he was resistant to make the show is his health was starting to fail, and he just didn't know if he had the energy to take on another series. I mean, you're working 14-hour days. You know, it's just an exhausting process to be a showrunner, and he just didn't know if he had it in him. But he wasn't going to let them go make a TV series about space cadets, and he wanted to settle up on the business that hadn't been taken care of.
Well, you know, James Gardner they should have learned their lesson with James Gardner. You know, the Rockford Files. You know, he realized after that show was gone, because he owned part of it. Mm-hmm. You know, they kept saying, "Well, it's not making any money," and he wasn't making any money. Well, he ended up, you know, filing court action. And then they settled really fast because, you know, we were talking big bucks.
It was a big deal. Yeah, he filed a lawsuit against Universal, and he was the first actor to do it. Because, see, here's the thing. You file a lawsuit against a studio, well, it's like the story we talked about earlier with Sheldon Leonard. I mean, top TV producer out there, and he goes to war against a network, and suddenly he's done. So Rockford, you know, James Gardner, he knew that when he did that, he may never work again. But he said, you know, you're not going to do this to me.
Oh yeah,
and he did work because everybody just loved James Gardner. You know, you were not going to stop giving him work. But he was the first actor to file a lawsuit like that. Robert Wagner was the next one for Heart to Heart, same deal, and so forth. Because you know, when you've got a profit participation plan in Hollywood, these bookkeepers are very creative.
Oh yeah,
you know. Good luck. Good luck getting your profit participation.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would think people would, you know, learn to listen. By the way, I'm going to say this. James Gardner became my dad's friend. My dad served during World War II and Korea. Uh-huh. And when my dad was going to be discharged, the last couple of months while he was in the service, he was in Korea. Guess who he met? And James Gardner, you know, well, he wasn't Gardner then, but, you know, became friends with my dad, you know, and when I was a little kid, every summer, this guy, all I knew was a guy coming from, you know, California would come up and visit my dad for a week or so. And then my dad would take off. And, my dad was an engineer at Boeing. So they would just take off and do things. One day I realized by watching a TV show called Maverick who the guy was. And, you know, till my dad died, I mean, you know, they were in touch with each other every year. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I will say this.
He didn't act like a star, did he?
No, but my dad said you don't want to let James drive a car.
Really?
Yeah, my dad would come home.
Well, that's why in Rockford Files, every time he was driving, it seemed like he crashed.
Well, you know what? He created that one thing where the car would, you know, be going and did a 360 and go the other way. James did that himself and actually even taught other stunt drivers how to do it. I mean, James actually raced, you know, in the circuit. I mean, he was really into it. But my dad said...
Oh, so your dad didn't mean he was a bad driver. He meant that he was a kind of he scared you. If you were in the car with him, he would scare you.
Yeah, my dad said you could pee your pants really fast when he was driving. That's a little tidbit.
Like riding along with Steve McQueen. Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Oh, yeah. But, you know, that's a little tidbit I just threw out there. You know, the world is small, you know. It's you know, these little stories.
I didn't know that. Very interesting. I would not have guessed that. Well, you know, actually, James Gardner did that that racing film in the mid-'60s, Grand Prix.
Yeah.
He and McQueen were racing to try to get a racing film out first. McQueen was going to do Le Mans, and James Gardner was going to do Grand Prix, and Gardner beat McQueen to it. So yeah, Gardner by pushing that project, that shows you right there he was really into that stuff. I never thought about it until just now, but that makes sense.
Well, one little thing, you know, after they did the Great Escape, you know, he imported and brought back him and Steve McQueen, Austin Healey's. And, you know, I hate to say it, James and Steve McQueen had their differences quite a bit, you know, and they lived down the street from each other from what I used to remember, what my dad told me. But, you know, they would get out at night, right, when it was late, and race each other up and down the streets there where they lived.
Yeah. And then they had a race to see who could make a movie first about it. That's so funny.
Yeah.
And James Gardner won.
Oh, yeah.
That must have just